Ravens flock, what's going on with you guys? Listen, I don't know what to make of this whole situation. This has been very confusing, and we're gonna talk about it. Before we get into that, we got some good news. Ravens flock, our main man, Willie Snead, has been activated. He's been taken off the reserve list, and he will be available to play against the Browns on Monday night. Great news. Getting Willie Snead back is great news. I know a lot of people were tough on Willie Snead early on in the season, but then he ended up becoming our most effective receiver. So hopefully he'll come back and he'll still be effective. What I'm hoping for the most part is Willie Snead comes back. He's effective. Mark Andrews comes back. He's effective as well. And Lamar and Marquise might have figured something out. So hopefully that duo gets to be effective. Because if we can get three guys on our receiving core to be effective, we might be able to spark something. We'll see. Because, we already know Lamar's got that connection and chemistry with Andrews. And we know him and Marquise seem to be finally clicking together. And him and Willie Snead were already clicking before this whole situation came out. So if all these three guys can come out and be effective, we might have something going here. So it's great to get Willie Snead back. I'm so happy he's back. Great news. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to talk about this Dez Bryant situation. I don't know what to make of this. To start things off, the morning before the game on Tuesday against the Cowboys, they test Dez Bryant. They get inconclusive results. Next thing you know, game's here. He's warming up on the field. They pull him off to test him. And next thing you know, 20 minutes before the game, we're hearing Dez Bryant has tested positive. He's getting taken out. He will not play in tonight's game. And all of a sudden, we're getting confused as to how this is happening. Like, did they just go test him now and all of a sudden he tested positive? Like, what's going on? The whole situation is confusing. It's conflicting. A lot of us are frustrated. You guys know I was frustrated to see that. I didn't know what was going on. A lot of us, speculated maybe this was a false positive. I know Engraven was definitely one person who speculated this was a false positive. And looking at it now, it definitely looks to be the case. But we'll talk about that. So yeah, him coming off and not being able to play in that game, he was very emotional. It hurt him. He was talking about calling it for a season because he can't take this. He was spilling his feelings all over Twitter. Just not being able to play in that game, I know it was tough for him. But that game passes, we get the victory, we move on. We felt bad for Dez Bryant for not being able to play in that game. Yesterday comes around, and we're kind of waiting to hear about this Dez Bryant situation. Now that he's tested positive, one of the Ravens going to put him on the reserve list because now he's got to have that 10-day wait before he can come back. So we don't hear anything about this yesterday. We're kind of waiting. We don't hear anything. The day passes. Here comes today. Early on today, Dez Bryant tweets out that he had 2 tests come back negative. I believe they may have tested him yesterday and they tested him today, and both those tests came back negative. But he had 2 tests come back, and both of them tested him negative for the COVID. So now we're all confused. If he has 2 negative tests, they tested him twice, and he comes up with negative results on both times. How did he get that positive result? Well, that brings on the speculation that it was a false positive. And I feel like for the most part, this evidence is enough for us to believe that it is a false positive. But, we're not 100% sure. I believe it was a false positive. You can't come back with a positive like that on Tuesday, and next thing you know, 2 other tests come out within the span of 48 hours, and he tests negative from both of them. Clearly, it was a false positive. So now we hear about this. This is going all around the NFL. Yep, Dez tested negative twice on these tests. He had a positive test before the game, and everything's being very confusing. We're trying to figure out the situation, and now we're kind of looking at it like this. Now that Dez Bryant has come out and talked about him testing negative for 2 tests, does that mean Dez Bryant is going to get to play? What's going to happen with him specifically? We're not exactly sure. A lot of us were thinking, well, since he got 2 negative tests, that must mean that was a false positive test. And since that's a false positive test, Dez should be pretty much good to go, right? He doesn't need to go on the reserve list. He might be able to play against the Browns. Who knows? We're just waiting to hear about this situation. All of a sudden, later on today, we hear that the Ravens put Dez Bryant on the reserve list. He's going to be quarantined for the next 10 days. What? Like, what? I'm so confused about this situation. Why is he on the reserve list now? What? So let me get this straight. You test him the morning of the game, inconclusive. You test him moments before the game's about to start up, he tests positive. Okay, you go through Wednesday, we don't hear anything about that. Here comes today, Dez Bryant comes out and says they've tested him twice and both results come back negative. So now, seeing that, you would assume, well, that means two negative tests. I guess it was a false positive. He should be good to go, right? He should be able to play against the Browns. Nope, Ravens still put him on the COVID list. So I'm not exactly sure what the situation is going on with Dez Bryant. We know he didn't really have any close contacts, but at the same time, I'm not even sure at this point whether or not he has it. Because you have one positive test before the game and then two negative tests after the game. Like that game, moments before the game happens, he tests positive. Days later, he's testing negative. I don't know what to say. I don't know what to think. This is a very, very confusing situation. I don't know what to think about this. This is crazy. And honestly, if it's a false positive, this is not really surprising. We've had a lot of false positive tests come out throughout the season. A lot of players end up testing positive, and then they test them on later on, and it's like negative. And then they'll test them again, and it's negative. And it's like, all right, I guess that was a false positive. We've seen this happen several times throughout the season. What's wrong with me, man? I don't know. This whole situation's got my mind mumbled because, like, he tests positive, then he tests negative, and it looks like it was a false positive, but he's still getting put on the reserve list. I'm so just confused right now. But yeah, we've seen this happen throughout the league with several players. They test positive, then they end up getting tested again, and they come back with negative, and it's like, all right, it's a false positive. Here, it seems like it's that same situation. They test him for the game, he tests positive, they test him later on a day or two later, and they get two negative tests back. What are we supposed to do with that? It would seem like, I guess it was a false positive. I don't know exactly how the NFL handles this protocol. Like, if you end up testing positive and then they end up testing you later on and you test negative and they test you again to make sure you test negative, I don't know what the NFL does with that. Because at that point, you would have to assume it's a false positive. Because a lot of the tests they're giving these players, there are a lot of quick tests with quick results. You know, it doesn't like, all right, we'll test you, and over the span of the next 24 to 48 hours, we'll see what happens there. No, it's a quick test to get quick results. And when you get a test like that, you're not 100% sure if it's going to come back accurate, which is why we're seeing a lot of false positives. So at the end of the day, I don't know what to do with this situation. The Ravens are just going to put him on the reserve list. They don't want to take any chances. At the end of the day, I understand why the Ravens are going to put him on the list. Even if he doesn't have, COVID, it's still safe just in case because we are literally coming out of an outbreak in our locker room. Over 20 players were put on the reserve list because they all tested positive. We have finally gotten them back. Willie Snead coming back today has finally pretty much put it together for all our players. We've just got our starters back. You don't want to take a risk and all of a sudden one player may or may not have it. And the next thing you know, we're like, all right, let's not take the risk. We're going to keep him off the list. We're not going to quarantine him. And next thing you know, rip right back on the list. Multiple players are back there. The Ravens aren't trying to go through that situation again. They want to be precautious. So I understand why they're going to put Dez Bryant on the list. But man, this just brings up a lot of questions. And it brings up a lot of conspiracies because, like, how does he test positive moments before the game, but now we're seeing he tested negative days after the game? Like, this is very confusing. I know a lot of people have been looking around and saying Jerry Jones must have done something. He must have interfered with that somehow. And some people will look at that and say, well, why would Jerry Jones do anything like that? It's not like Dez Bryant would impact the game. Well, that's not the point. I think the point was Dez Bryant was going out there to send a message. Even if he didn't score a touchdown, if he was effective and just did something and helped his team win, he had a point to prove. He had a point to go out and prove. He still wanted to show he still had something left in the tank. Now, whether or not he was going to go out there and have a great performance, who knows? But if he would have been effective, he would have done something and the team ends up with a victory, that's his message to Jerry Jones and the Cowboys that I still got something left, even if you guys didn't believe in me. I don't know the full message he wanted to show, but that could have been part of it. And I wouldn't put it past Jerry Jones to do something like this, but do I think he did this? No, I just think these tests that they be giving out, a lot of false positives tend to happen because they're quick tests. So I don't know anything about this whole situation. I don't know. Maybe you guys talk about the conspiracy theories. I don't really think that it was a situation where Jerry Jones got involved. I just feel like it was a false positive and the Ravens are taking precautions just to make sure, in case he has it, whether or not he has it or not, they just want to be sure because we don't want to deal with another outbreak. We just came from an outbreak that we've been dealing with for like the last 3 weeks. We don't want to go back to that. We're trying to make a run for the playoffs. We want our guys to be, safe and contained. We don't want another outbreak. We just got through one. We just got our guys back, so we don't want to deal with that again. But it is what it is. I feel bad for Dez Bryant. He wanted to play against the Cowboys. This was his chance, and then he doesn't get to do it. And now he's put on the COVID list, and he may not even have it in the first place. So it sucks for Dez Bryant, but this is the whole thing. I still hope he's willing to come back and play. I still hope he's not going to be sitting down and thinking, yeah, I'm not coming back because of this whole situation. I hope he's still willing to play. But it's up to him for the most part. Anyway, that's all I got. This has been crazy. We'll see what happens in the coming weeks. I'm hoping to make my Browns-Ravens preview in the next couple days, maybe Saturday. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens. But as the game gets closer, I'll definitely make my prediction. Anyway, that's all I got, and I'm out of here, man. Peace!